We'll open January 6th City Council work meeting.
I'll make a motion to adopt tonight's agenda. Got a couple changes. On number 7, I'd like to add 245th Avenue paving project, and then number 8 would be adjourn.
I'll second the motion.
Motion made, seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none to the motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Jack, item 3.
Thank you, Steve. Item 3 is a discussion of proposed ordinance revisions. Some of these are for language cleanup. This time, Aaron McDermott, our zoning administrator, will present the staff report.
Evening.
Hello. So for the city ordinances, we do have a number of items that I would like council's input on. The first one being Chapter 74 Utilities and Appendix A, Section 410 variances for the septic holding tank variances. Septic holding tanks are not addressed within the Appendix A zoning, but they are regulated within Chapter 74 Utilities. Septic systems as a whole are only mentioned 5 times within the zoning ordinance. As part of the state building code, septic holding tanks are required to obtain a variance by state statute. And as these holding tanks are not a zoning issue but a building code matter, it is essentially not required for planning commission consideration and approval. Minnesota statute 462.357 addresses planning and zoning controls for the state of Minnesota. And under subdivision 6, it mentions appeals and adjustments, which is the planning commission. So appeals to the Board of Appeals and Adjustments may be taken by any affected person upon compliance with any reasonable conditions imposed by the zoning ordinance. So by that logic, necessarily, since it's not dealing with the zoning ordinance, there is justification to move septic holding tank variances to be a city council only required variance, which would save the residents time and money. And with just like the cold and how frequently septic systems do need to be changed, with the limited amount of time per year that it's a possibility for septic contractors, it would really save a lot of the residents a lot of time to be able to move septic holding tank variances from a 6 to 8 week turnaround to a 2 to 4 week turnaround. So staff is requesting council consider the exemption of the requirements for the approval of septic holding tank variances in city code from approval by the planning commission. The public hearing requirements for the variances would be heard by city council on this matter. And then we've got Appendix A, Section 14, detached accessory structures for buildable.
Perhaps maybe we want to talk one at a time here.
Okay.
That'll be, I think, a little more productive. So, quick question. You talk about one of the reasons is to better expedite the process. So right now it takes 6 to 8 weeks, and by changing this to just a city council action, it cuts it down to 2 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So because of the time frame in which they'd have to apply for the planning commission meetings, we require, I believe it's 30 days from the meeting. So that's already 4 weeks. So then after that meeting, it adds another 2 weeks before it is even heard by city council. And that's assuming that there are no issues that arise otherwise.
But wouldn't that notification process still be the same with council?
So with the public hearing notices, we have to send them to the residents within 350 feet 10 days before the public hearing. So the 30 days is typically to
Excuse me.
accumulate all of the information that we need for variances. And like that's what the city cutoff has been for getting planning commission items ready. Because of the nature of the septic holding tanks, they have to have a letter from a septic contractor stating that there are no other available opportunities for drain fields. So the septic holding tank variances already require a much stricter level of documentation to even be considered for a variance.
Understood. I guess what I'm trying to understand is, you talk about the 30-day notification, you still have to have a 30-day notification.
It's 10, the 10 days. So if we got the
So,
application.
oh, it's 30, I'm sorry, it's 30
Yeah.
days to gather all the
Yeah,
information.
just to get all of the write-ups together for planning
But
commission.
once you have that same, if it went to council?
Not typically. So with the septic holding tanks, I have a template. A lot of times the 30 days is to make sure that the write-ups are all set for planning commission, make sure that we have all of that information. But with the holding tanks, we require all of that information upfront at the time of application.
Okay.
So we've already got what we need, we've got the template, and with holding tanks, because obviously the city doesn't want to tell someone, no, you can't live in your house anymore, like a holding tank would be required for them to even continue to live in their residence, because they'd need a sewage treatment of some way. It cuts out like the time.
I understand, but I mean, with the way you wrote, this is written up, it's, right now it could take as long as 8 weeks, but if we change this to just go to council, it could be as short as 2 weeks. That's a tremendous difference, and I'm just trying to, you know, when it comes to council, we still have to have all the same information as it did if it went to planning.
So
I'm missing
is that time frame due to the fact that you have to compile all this, put a notice in a news flash for that planning commission, which has to be a certain amount of time, then they have to have the meeting in order to address this issue. And then after that, then we now need to put out another notice, waiting a certain period of time before it can come to city council. Is that where the extra time is coming in?
The time is coming in from the policy that was in place when I started with planning commission, we require the 30 days before the meeting. Like, applications have to be in 30 days before the planning commission meeting for anything that's going to be on the agenda.
And
So-
that was staff, I mean, staff wanted 30 days. I mean, is your point that staff
It's-
doesn't
it's
need 30
not-
days?
Well, it's not, from what I understand, it was a policy handed down by one of the previous councils a number of years ago.
Sure,
And so we've always gone with that. But with it going to planning commission, then it also would still have to wait an additional 2 weeks after the fact to make it to council for approval. So it does add at a minimum of 2 weeks,
Sure.
assuming that the
That's
council,
understood.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was one holding tank variance where it had to wait, not the next council meeting, but the council meeting after that. So it did end up taking almost the full 60 days for a holding tank. That they couldn't even, like, we couldn't approve the permit for a holding tank until council had approved it. So it ended up, with the timeline for the septic contractors, ended up taking almost an additional 3 months for them to even install it.
Other than that, the one you referred to, how often does something like this happen?
In the last year, we got, I believe, 5 septic holding tanks. Typically, it hasn't been very common for holding tank variances, but as Coon Lake Beach, all those septic systems are aging and a lot of the people are selling down there, it is becoming more common.
so what are just to give a perspective for us, the 5 cases you were like, are these were situations where septic's failed and they they need to put in a holding tank, or is it new
Yes.
construction?
We don't allow new construction to go in with holding tanks by state statute. They can't build a new house unless they can fit a type 1 system in, and a holding tank is by Minnesota, or by the plumbing code, considered a type 2. So these are all
We've had a lot of
existing,
variances of
Yeah.
that over the years.
but it would all be for existing
So,
homes.
I'm trying, the reason I'm asking is, you know, if it's a new house build, obviously, there's a longer time commitment, it's on
Right.
contractors. If, it sounds like what you're talking about is more of an emergency situation.
Right, and this is why, this conversation has come up between me and the building inspector several times, because they're frustrated with how long it takes the variances to get passed, and they were asking if I could streamline it in any way. So did a lot of research with what the state statutes are, because they are required for variance, because of the emergency situations, we talked about if there was any way to move forward quicker with those.
Okay.
It kind of sounds like the bottleneck is at the planning commission, not that it should be ignored. Why does it take so long for the planning commission, the 30 days?
So,
That was the policy that staff or council came up with years ago, that the materials had to be into planning to allow sufficient review before the planning commission meeting. Because we were having serious issues years ago with just not being prepared for meetings and things coming in too late, so they set that for planning. I understand it, but the other thing too, on the other side of this, the reason why planning has these public hearings is, I think partially because the Board of Equalization, years ago we merged that with planning, about, it was for your time even, I think. And then council, is a way to not, for council not to have to hold all these public hearings. But that's just from a history standpoint, so.
And actually, the Board of Appeals that this refers to is actually the zoning authority, which is the planning commission.
Right, yeah.
It-
So
it-
that's why all those types of public hearings with the planning, so,
But with this, we'd still have to have the public hearing, but the public hearing would be held at the council meeting.
yeah. No, now I understand it's more for an emergency situation, not a development standpoint, because like I said, council's approved many holding tank variances over the years, particularly around the lake, so. And that was for new construction or remodels or stuff like that, so.
What could be changed at the planning commission to ensure that it has adequate aired out?
Well, I think we can do something about the 30-day for one.
Yeah.
If staff doesn't need 30 days for this type of application, I think that there's a way of shortening that. That's if we keep it at planning, but it's also dependent on the calendar, if,
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say too, there's no holdup at planning commission, it's just eliminating a step because it is an emergency situation. And sometimes when how meetings fall, somebody has to wait even a couple more weeks or a few more weeks because of just the way that. the
yeah,
meeting-
because the planning's the week before, well, now it's a little easier. If it's the planning, if it's before council, you can get it into the council packet now, so.
If you have a situation where you have the 5 Monday week, like we
Right.
did in December, the planning commission meeting would have been 3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago, yeah. And just sitting there, so, when it could have been a council action, so I think that better frames the issue.
And again, I think the basic point here is, this is not a land use issue, it's a building code issue. That's where the regulations come from.
So it's not part of the zoning code,
Right.
so they don't need the public hearing in front of the planning commission.
What would get missed if you don't know anything about this? You have no knowledge base on what the holding tank and what the planning and zoning would look at or consider, or,
So all of these reviews
That's a
for
real
holding
potential.
tanks, before they're even presented to planning commission currently, Steve, the building inspector, and I do go over each of the applications to make sure that it is a complete application. He looks at the permit application to make sure that if approved, that if the variants were approved, that it would be acceptable based on state code. So none of these are, it's not being just put in front of council or planning commission with, they want to put a holding tank in. He actually goes through each as if he would be approving it beforehand. So we make sure that it does meet the code requirements.
I think the one thing we may lose is the benefit of, if there was something identified at the planning commission that was missing, or something that needed to be fixed, there'd be time before the council meeting to have that fixed. I guess it would really matter, if we had the same problem at council, it would just flip over to the next council meeting, so it probably wouldn't make a difference. It wouldn't make a difference. I don't think we lose anything from a application standpoint or review standpoint.
I'm just thinking that you two are much more experience in that than I am. I wouldn't catch what you guys probably would, not to speak for anybody else.
Well, we're on the same table, so,
Well, this experience-wise,
yeah.
Randy's, what do you have, 3 years in? 2 years, 3 years on the planning?
Yes.
Well, I think Aaron's point, though, and Stephanie's point is, it's not really a zoning
Yeah.
issue. It kind of is from an aspect of setbacks and all that, and if a new, would a development be allowed if not for the holding tank? But that's not, these are existing homes with failing systems, which obviously we want fixed, and if the only way to fix it is by holding tank, and it's an emergency situation, I mean, I think it's prudent to have it just go to council, so. I think it's prudent for the change. It's just, instead of going to planning, just have it go straight to council for these emergency ones, not for, the ones that are redeveloping or expanding or anything like that, so. I mean, true failing systems, so.
I'm for anything that saves our residents time and money. And you did say money, and I'm wondering, how is it saving them money?
In East Bethel, there's probably a 4 to 6 month period where septic contractors are really able to get here with road restrictions and stuff like that. If we're pushing it on the tail end of the year, the septic contractor may say, I can't do it this year, or I can do it, but you're gonna need to pay an expedited fee, something like that.
Yeah,
and it
for
can
frost breaking and stuff like that, construction
got it.
costs will go up, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So, are we good with, staff putting forward this change?
I have no problems with it.
Okay, here we go, we're through the first one.
So then we've got Appendix A, Section 14, detached accessory structures for buildable area. Within the Shoreland Overlay District, the ordinance requires detached accessory structure sizes to be determined by buildable area. This addresses impacts that detached accessory structures may have on stormwater runoff from the increase of impervious surface area on the roofs. With a significant portion of the city covered in wetlands, many of which are considered highly susceptible, it may be reasonable to change the wording in the detached accessory structure ordinance to buildable area instead of lot size. There have been recent situations in which residents owning acreage with limited building area are requesting their lot size be determined on the factor of allowable size for detached accessory structures. The lot size requirement, Appendix A, Section 14, is clearly defined as it specifies to the hundredths of an acre the size requirement. In some cases, previous staff had authorized smaller lots that were within a .05 acre variance to be rounded up to the next acreage or building size category for determination of the allowable size for detached accessory structures. There is a newer development for houses that are going in on each of the lots is approximately 7 acres. It was kind of a difficult puzzle fitting them in there because of the way that the wetland setbacks are. However, if they were to come in with an application for a detached accessory structure, on these lots, we would have to go by lot area, because that's how ordinance speaks, or like that's the language. So we would have to allow them, I believe it's 3,200 square feet. But the lots aren't conducive to that. Like, there's no way that they could fit those on these lots. So it would end up being an argument of semantics, basically, on whether or not they could build these, and it may end up with liability to the city because of how the ordinance is written, which is why staff is requesting the potential change to buildable area as opposed to lot size. But the request in this is guidance for a policy on the lot size adjustment for if say a resident has 1.98 acres and there's no wetlands on there, would staff be allowed to grant them the size for the 1,800 square foot detached accessory structure on that lot? Or because of the way the ordinance is written, would they still only be allowed 960 square feet for the garage?
So to that point, I assume you're talking about the fourth bullet where it talks about staff had allowed this .05. I don't understand why that would be allowed, because I think it's pretty clear. It's either 2 or it's less than 2.
Right, and that was what my interpretation of it was. I just know that in the past, previous staff had informed people, well, it's close enough.
Oh.
So,
That was even when I was here previously.
Well, I'm sure of it. I mean, I'm not surprised by it, but
Not in the
I
last
don't know
eight-
why we would say, well, we'll give you a .05 fluctuation. Well, if that's it, let's change the numbers then, it's, number's a number, so.
The last 10, 12 years, when I was doing, I had to buy more property to get, there was no close enough even thought about.
Yeah, I mean,
I have-
we've had people buy slivers of land just to
Right.
get a bigger building, so.
I bought from the golf course, paid a
Yeah,
fortune
so,
for it.
I mean, that, to me, that's more of a staff thing, not a ordinance. I mean, ordinance is clear. It's more how it's interpreted.
And when I was reading this detached garages, accessory buildings, I wasn't connecting it to the shoreland overlay district. This looks like it would change the whole current definition.
from buildable to lot size, or like,
Well, to be, this doesn't say anything about buildable on the top of the example, or buildable or overlay. It just addresses, like I think the state, we had 120 without inspections or permits, and I think the state changed that to 200. So I didn't see anything about that reflected here.
Which that is one that is gonna be a proposed change.
Pardon?
That will be a
Yeah.
proposed change too, coming up. So it's the same as the, building code, which is 200.
For the 200.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with a little bit of being flexible. I mean, I know they've done it in the past, and I just don't understand why it has to be so stringent. I think when they put those numbers in, it was not hardcore set. It was as a guideline, not to be exact.
It doesn't say about up there. It
Well,
doesn't
it
say
should.
guideline. I mean, what's wrong with having the clear criteria to everyone that's clear? And by saying, well, if you're close enough, well, now you're making it fuzzy, and are you making it fuzzier for one person than the other? How do you defend any of that?
Who would have the
And then it
authority,
puts pressure on staff to make judgment calls and be pressured by something, so.
who would have the authority to make a fudge?
I
Footwear.
I don't know if staff doesn't follow it, whether that's right or not, because
Well, to me.
They did what I did.
technically you need a variance, so.
That's was the point I was gonna make, is, you know, we have these ordinances, and they're worded, in a, specific manner, because we have to treat ourselves, you know, somewhat like a court, where it says exactly what the document is, and we have to follow that, otherwise we run the risk of, not treating everyone the same and fairly, and I know that comment has come up multiple times in the past. And so therefore, if, so in my case, I literally live on, you know, 0.495 acres. So I would be within that, you know, that 0.5 of, you know, going from under a half an acre to the half acre to the 1.99 to 960 square feet. For me to be able to do that, shouldn't be up to staff. If I wanted to do that, I should have to come to city council and state my case in order for there to be an approval in order to get that done. And so, I'm not really in favor of hearing staff making those decisions, to be honest with you. I'm not gonna sit here and go after anybody or complain about it, but, you know, really, they should be sticking to that, and if they were to get those questions in the future, I would hope that they would, you know, tell that resident, look, you know, if you want to increase the size of that building and you don't meet these requirements, you're gonna have to apply for a variance and go before council and explain to us why you think that, you know, you're gonna be able to get that larger size on your property.
The problem with flexibility is where does it stop? And
Right.
it's not consistent. And in this case, the flexibility is the variance.
Yeah, and I think, and I agree, there's room for flexibility and everything, but, taking that onus off the staff to do that and having the council, I think is more, it's more, responsible, it's more open, because it'll be a public hearing. And we have the ability to be flexible. And I may be wrong, but I'm sure we've had variances similar to this in the past to allow buildings, you know. I'm sure there has been, so it's not like counts, because every situation different, but to me, I think that's it's a variance situation. It's clear it's a variance situation, so.
So what, I mean, yeah, we're only talking, what, 0.05% difference, and they would have to go and apply for the variance. What would the cost of the resident be to go through that process?
Our variance application process is $300 for the application fee, $55 for the county filing fee, and I believe that the fee schedule is just updated to $500 escrow.
So somebody'd have to come up with about $1,000 in order to go through this process. And, yeah, I realize that it's like, oh geez, it's only like 2.02. You know, why do I have to spend that much money to do that? But unfortunately, I don't think that we have a choice as a council to be able to set that aside. Now, if you want to, you know, go back and say, gee, for a variance of this type, we're going to reduce that cost or whatever, I don't know. But I don't think that we can, I agree with you, Steve.
Well,
I just don't like the idea that we're going to be, you know, saying to staff, well, gee, it's 0.02, is there 0.05? I mean, where does it stop?
Yeah, I mean, I got one point to make and then one suggestion I think will help is, it doesn't matter what those numbers are, we can shift those
or
acres
down.
to different numbers. This discussion's always gonna happen, so it doesn't matter what the numbers are.
Right.
And so it's back to, you know, either going over, you're at below the speed limit or you're above it, right? Or you're at it, you know, so. But one thing, you know, maybe consider, and I know we've had this discussion years past, is, instead of, because I know most of these issues are with the smaller lots, right? Instead of having these two first classifications, or under half acre gets 580 and half to 2 acres gets 960, why not make it graduated? Why not make it, base it on a 960, or, well, you can have 960 at 1/2 acre. You should be able to have a 900 square foot building if you're at 0.45 acres. You know, some kind of reasonable scale. And so to really just change that first criteria to that fraction of the 960, under 2.
Didn't we change this to these standards in 2014, kind of to accommodate residents, because so
No,
many
we
of them are
made some
looking
big
for...
changes.
Yeah, and that was when this was last changed, and it was even stricter than it was on
Yeah.
these. Plus, it also changed the maximum sidewall heights too.
Right.
Yeah.
That's-
So if you go to the graduated, you know, no one's really gonna see the difference between a 960 square foot building and a 900 square foot building. You're not gonna be able to tell the difference unless you go out and measure the thing. So the effect on the neighborhood is not, to me, is not any different, so. I think that, to me, and then that'll solve that flexibility issue too.
So who's gonna come up with this formula that you were speaking of?
That's why we have staff, so.
Staff and building official, we work on it.
It can't be the first time a city's done something like this.
Oh, this is a math equation.
No,
But-
I
but it's-
understand, but
it's-
somebody has to set that number.
Well, yeah, well, it's an easy calculation. And once you have it set up and you just make it a formula, say, here's your formula, the builders will know it and you tell them, if you got, 0.43 acres, this is the size of building you can have, so. So, because it is substantial, and like you said, there's been a lot of people that bought extra land just to get to that 960, and that's a huge jump, that's a whole garage stall, so,
The 960 used to be over 2, or at 2 or more.
yeah.
And I ended up having to buy 0.13, which is, I'm not gonna count that in how many dollars per inch.
I remember that.
Yeah? Yeah, you were helping me with it.
But at least then for the smaller lots, it gives them a little more flexibility. Now, the issue, to me, the issue of, sound like and this is back to the acreage thing is, I mean, if they're allowed to have a 2,400 square foot building, but there isn't enough high ground, well, they don't get to have a 2,400 square foot building. They still have to meet the permeability and or impervious area and all the setbacks. So I don't understand what the
There was,
conflict is there.
there was enough resident interest in this that got us to that point, and if there's opportunity to make some increments in there, that's.
No, I'm sorry, I'm asking a different question now, but,
This is about the wetland question and buildable area. It was just, we've seen an increasing number of properties come in where they want the maximum size for their square footage. And so it was really just staff wanting some direction on that. If direction is to tell them you don't have the room to put that on there and meet all of the setbacks, that's great. I just wanted to kind of see if that was something that you wanted to address in ordinance, or if that was gonna be more of a policy thing.
And I think the way this was written up was to convey, within the shoreland overlay district, that's already taken care of, because it limits the impervious area to 25%. So that's gonna limit your number of your square footage of buildings you're allowed. But outside that, it's lot size and not buildable area, because the impervious area don't come into effect.
well, I think that, I mean, when you look at say you look at a 10-acre lot, and you look at 2 10-acre lots, and one of them's half wetlands, I think people still look at it as being 10-acre lots. I mean, I think years ago when we did this, because we didn't have anything like this 25 years ago, but, I mean, it was people building these accessory buildings in areas where homes were only 50 feet apart. And so if you got big pieces of land, the theory was you should be able to have bigger buildings. It's no impact on your neighbors if they're still 500 feet away, whether it's wetlands or dry land. I don't know what matter that makes, but.
That's exactly where I fall, and I got 9 acres, and I only got 2 that's buildable, 7 that's wet, so I'm kinda,
Right,
all
but
I
that's
got.
not,
You're in the
that's not your limiting factor. Your limiting factor is you can't build in wetlands.
yeah, that's what I said.
That has
I can't
nothing to
build
do with
wetlands.
that
I got-
ordinance, so.
I thought I bought 9 acres, I could build the biggest building I could build, and I
I
can't.
mean, just look at Jamestown Street, all those homes are on, homes, some of those are like 0.4 acres, but it's 10-acre land, but it's just a little piece of land, so. And they can't get 2,400 square feet building on, some do, but.
Where are we?
So the real question is sounds like is whether or not we want to change it from buildable area or from lot size to buildable area.
What if what you just said about the overlay, shoreline overlay, and what the 25% of something or other, why wouldn't we just incorporate that into the definition? That's not part of the definition now, it sounds like.
There is already a pervious surface clause in the regular zoning ordinance. Anything that's not in shoreland overlay is not to exceed 50%. So it is kind of incorporated in there in more of a technical aspect.
It's just stricter in the shoreland
Yeah.
district.
It's stricter in the shoreline because essentially there's more impact on the lakes that these
Right.
things drain into.
Is that would fix things if that was included, in what you described?
As what Aaron just mentioned, the fact that there's 50% impervious area outside the shoreline, that makes that a lot more flexible in terms of what you can have for square footage of these additional buildings. So let's say you've got 10 acres and you have 3 of it that's buildable, then 50% of that can be impervious. In other words, it can be driveways, roofs, paved patios, anything that water doesn't run into. Even the class 5 driveway is considered impervious. Decks are not considered impervious though.
Seems to me lot size is gonna be a lot easier than going to buildable area.
This has definitely been a very helpful conversation, and I think that it'll make conversation with residents a lot easier now that I've gotten more of an insight on staff's opinion on this.
Okay.
So
back to
council, sorry.
what I brought up about whether we wanted to go to a graduated building size for the lowest, for anything below half acre. So between that 580 and 960, basically graduated. Which is almost. Yeah, I mean, that's just a
So
straight.
why wouldn't you just do the entire thing as graduated instead of just one section? So I mean, if it's a simple formula that says you can build a building of so many square feet per X amount of property, you're just taking that equation, adding it together, and you're gonna get your square footage.
Well, that's what.
None of these numbers would matter.
Well, no, the
Right?
5 or more actually has it. You can have more square footage based on how much for each additional acre. You get another 240 square feet, or increment thereof, so it's already graduated.
Right, but I
Going
mean,
up,
if you just
we can,
do the whole thing.
whole thing
from-
graduated.
From under half acre all the way up to, however many acres that you have, but you can have that many square feet per X of,
Really from under half acre up to 3 acres, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to set a minimum, or the maximum at the lowest lot size. And the 580 is reasonable, man, it's a double garage, so. I don't know, that's a good thought. Do we know if other cities do it that way? Do you see any drawbacks to doing it?
I don't see any drawbacks.
Make it easier for people that live here.
I think so.
well, maybe we should just direct staff to look at the problem and see if they can come up with a formula that works.
Well, it's not a problem, but maybe find a better way of doing this. and
Well, no,
come-
I'm not,
Yeah. come with-
maybe
I
that was
know.
the
I did
bad
that.
wording is the problem, but I mean, it seems to me that, we should let staff kind of play with it and see if they can't come up with something that would work along those lines, and then bring it back to council and say, this is what we think would work, and we can make a decision on it then.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Council?
Sure.
All right, we'll send it back to staff. Okay, on to the next one?
Throw it in there.
The
Ralph.
next ordinance is Appendix A, Section 10-15 for
Okay.
driveway access standards. Our present ordinance requires up to 75 feet of an improved paved driveway from an improved road. The fire code has different driveway requirements for driveways that are longer than 150 feet, 500 feet, and 750 feet respectively. There are a number of driveways that are longer than 750 feet within the city, one of which was approved as recently as 2015 that don't meet this requirement. The city has adopted the fire code in its entirety, however, it's not readily available to the general public. It may be reasonable to amend the driveway ordinance to require the fire code specifications directly to ensure residents are aware of the additional requirements. This came up very recently. There's a 3/4 acre, or 3/4 mile driveway that is going into a new build. And this was the first time that I had heard of these fire code requirements. We sent the new residents application to Mark. And that was when he let us know they need a turnaround in case of emergency, and that is where the next attachment is. So the driveways over specific distances have to have a turnaround, they have to be able to meet the weight requirements for emergency vehicles, and they need to have space for emergency vehicles to pass one another. Like in case an ambulance is trying to leave when fire trucks are coming, or vice versa, stuff like that. So staff is requesting that city council recommend if we should include the fire code regulations into the driveway zoning appendix.
Well, forgive me for saying, but it sounds to me like this is more of a lack of clear direction in our code rather than changing anything seriously in our code. I mean, it simply seems to me that in the Appendix A, Section 1015, we should merely be, putting a pointer there that says you have to also follow the fire code in section wherever it happens to be, and it has to meet these requirements as well. To me, that seems like a fairly innocuous fix to me, unless somebody else sees a problem with that.
And just so we're clear, this is for new construction.
Yes.
It's not for existing.
Not for existing.
Okay.
Well, one of the things in here is a 75,000-pound vehicle. There's not gonna be a whole lot of country roads that are gonna have 75,000. Just the gravel road to get there might not do 75,000 pounds. And then have a meeting lane or some such thing. That's,
Well, that's a 9-ton road. No, that's less than a 9-ton
Yeah.
road. 75,000 pounds. That's the weight of, I'm sure it's the weight of our bigger rigs get there.
It'd be like about 6 to 8 inches of compact in Class 5.
and up to 750, well, more than 750 feet of that, that's quite an expense.
Oh, no doubt.
And then have meeting lanes along that 750 feet or more.
Just to clarify, this is something that that council has already adopted. Our fire code states that the city of East Bethel has adopted the fire code in its entirety. So this is more just requesting to add to the zoning appendix as well, clarification, so that when people are looking to build their house, they know where to find this.
So to make sure they're aware of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's more for the ease of the residents to know what the requirements are. It would likely state that it's linking to Appendix D, fire apparatus access roads, and then Figure D 103.1, much like Randy was stating, just to make sure that it's written in there exactly where to find what these requirements are.
Somebody gets a building code and they're notified they have to have, what, 6 inches of Class 5, compacted Class 5, and a cul-de-sac before they can get approved for a building code.
I think the point is, though, that's how it is right now. That is, we're not changing anything. What staff is suggesting is they make a change so it makes it more aware for the builders that they have to meet this, so they're not surprised later on.
These two requirements aren't linked together, so what we're requesting is in the zoning code, this references the fire code for these driveway standards.
Do we enforce any of this?
Oh, yes.
That
We just had one where we.
775,000 growth, that's
Well, we did it
that's
with
34 and a half
Carlson.
tons.
Palm's place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had to change, they had to change the road because of it, so, because it was so long.
This is 34 and a half tons, not a 9-ton.
No, but that's the road standards. You have different thicknesses of service
Sure.
material that determine what the tonnage weight is.
So at least 75,000 pounds is at least
And then that's.
34 and a half,
Yeah, but
32 and a half
The
tons.
those tonnage things.
No,
are based
37
on
and a half.
Number of axles too, so.
That's not the, I understand that. I know the axle part, but it's not what it says here.
It says for a 75,000-pound vehicle,
Yep.
but when you say a certain tonnage of road, then that's based on the number of axles, which translates into 5-ton road, 7.
What we're talking about is what this says. Doesn't say anything about axles and
Right, but that,
tandems or,
is that the state code?
it's a national fire code, I think.
Okay, but we're not changing that.
No.
No.
We've already adopted that. It's just not,
Like-
what staff wants to do is make sure that it's clear to the applicants that they have to meet these requirements too.
So all we'd be doing in the zoning code is just putting a sentence in there, linking them back to
Right.
this code, is what it is. That's all we're doing.
Right. Uh, This is on new construction we're talking about. Have we, you say we have enforced this before,
Yes,
Yes,
or somebody's,
and just recently
Yeah.
we did too with the new construction.
how long, for conversation's sake, do you recall the length of the driveway?
oh, it's 3/4 of a mile.
How many turnouts did they, or passing lanes did they put in?
I don't,
It was just one
yeah.
that they did. And the fire chief was fine with it. They worked with the fire chief. Then up by the house, they had to do a turnaround. It's for safety reasons.
Oh, I understand the purpose.
Yeah, I mean, there's,
Completely.
there's properties our firefighters got to, they've had to back out trucks a quarter
Yeah.
mile, back it out, you know, big truck. So I have a hard time backing out, pick up that far. Okay. Is there anything further on this? Okay,
All right, and now we are to Appendix A, Section 22-3C, prohibited parking. The rural residential zone, off-street parking and loading requirement section requires that parking of buses, motor trucks, and/or semi-trailers on an individual properties longer than 24 hours continuously is prohibited. The wording of this requirement makes enforcement of this ordinance very difficult. So within rural residential subdivisions, we have been getting a number of complaints of semis being parked there. And since July of 1973, the city of East Bethel has actively prohibited the parking of semis there for any purpose other than just loading and unloading. That was the reason for this amendment. One of these cases has been ongoing for, I want to say, more than 4 years. So in the interest of saving taxpayer money for attempting to enforce this ordinance, staff would like to change the verbiage on the prohibited parking for rural residential. And the language that's in the recommendation is it's pretty rough, and staff would want to revisit this because it doesn't necessarily match the way the city feels on larger lots that aren't in subdivisions. There's a very different, like, almost not quite culture, but like a different feeling in the rural residential zoning in these smaller subdivisions where these semis are being parked on the street or in front of the house and are causing a public nuisance to the residents, as opposed to somebody who's got 40 acres and would likely never have a complaint from the neighbors.
How would this affect farm property?
Farm property?
Yes.
That's it. The ag properties
Some of
are,
it's rural residential.
to be really honest, with the code enforcement being complaint basis only and all of the ag properties that are out there having been established and being there for a very long time, we've never gotten a complaint on those. Most of the complaints are coming from smaller neighborhoods where somebody comes and parks their semi on their driveway. They go to do maintenance on it out in the neighborhood. They're parking it, leaving it running on the street at, 11 o'clock at night. And those are where a lot of the complaints are coming from.
what, in the quote there, it says parking of buses, motor trucks, and/or semi-trailers. Sounds weird, but what's a motor truck?
I don't know. That's just how our code currently reads.
So
Pick me.
I think,
It doesn't define it in our ordinance.
I think
Uh,
we need to clarify that for sure. I mean, and even, it says semi-trailers, it doesn't say semi-trucks.
Right.
So I think that should be clarified as well,
The
so.
semi-trucks do have, under the definitions of commercial vehicles in our code, they have another specification. Oh, a motor truck, a single or multiple axle straight frame truck with a maximum gross vehicle weight rating of 20,000 pounds or greater. So it's the definition of commercial vehicles, which is in our ordinance.
How many
currently.
tons?
200,000 pounds, or, sorry, 20,000 pounds or greater for gross vehicle weight.
The whole quote's not there. So,
This came out of the
Mm.
zoning,
Those are,
okay,
out of the zoning,
oh, so,
Code is a definition.
definitions.
oh, it's under-
All the definitions
Yeah,
are
so it is in
listed on
zoning
10
code.
pages.
it's not, it's in the.
Jack,
chapter
click,
70.
click on the definitions word, there you'll get the whole thing. I think,
Yeah, it's in there.
there it is. 20,000 pounds or greater, okay. Okay, now I understand what a motor truck is. So a semi-truck would fall into that, okay. So you mentioned that staff wanted to look at this a little further, is that what you said?
So one of the ideas that I had been kind of considering to bring to you is to revise our vehicle definitions to the MnDOT standard. It would make it easier to enforce because most of the people who are driving semis, they are aware of what the MnDOT standards are. But I feel like the suggested recommendation of those which are being actively loaded or unloaded or which are being utilized to render a service not to exceed 24 hours in one calendar month, it should be added within a platted subdivision.
Okay.
Or consideration for lot size. Because it would be extremely different for someone who's got 40 acres or more to be parking a semi. You know, they can screen it adequately versus a, 1 acre, 2 acre rural residential lot.
Yeah, I was dealt with contract language, and in contract language, if it doesn't say it, it isn't there. If it isn't described, it isn't there. So what we're talking about kind of is to make things easier for whoever it's gonna be easier on to police onesie-twosies instead of the multiple agricultural places.
Well, and this is
And then if
why-
somebody down the road says, well, that's not what it says, get that truck out of here, Bruce Wyatt.
Well, and this is why staff is looking for direction, because as it stands now, we either cannot enforce semis in rural residential at all. Like, we either leave it how it is and it's unenforceable legally, or we change it to make it enforceable,
But
is where we
you,
stand.
you mentioned that we use neighborhood police.
Yeah, all of our code enforcement is from the complaints
Right.
within the neighborhood, yes.
Wouldn't that still apply?
I mean, it's a valid complaint, but we can't prove it. It's unenforceable, is what, like, we can bring it to court and then their thoughts are, how do you know it's been there for 24 hours? Did you stand there and watch? Or did you go back and take a picture? So in a lot of these cases, they're moving the semi a foot. So I come back 24 hours later
Oh.
to try and enforce this and it's moved and I can't prove it because the pictures are now unenforceable.
It's 1 foot makes a difference?
Yes. If it's not in the exact same
Yeah.
location 24 hours later, we can't do anything.
Well, from that aspect, it makes sense. I think we still got the
Could add language. in
concern
there.
of lot sizes, so, you know.
Or we could add language in there that can only remain on the property for 24 hours. 'Cause I think right now it says in one location. Or how
No,
is
it says,
I'm trying to think how we used to have, I thought, it might have, was it based on subdivisions before we went to districts?
I don't know.
I can't remember what it was.
Before it was in the districts, it was only in, the ordinance specifically said parking of semis on residential lots in the city of East Bethel is prohibited,
Yeah,
so.
so do you wanna look at the lot sizes and try to come up with some language that'll?
Or do we just do it for subdivision? Well,
No, cause no one knows what a subdivision is, other than some people at City Hall. you know.
How does it become unenforceable if they move it a foot? What this says, if this is applicable, is that on the property more than 24 hours,
Okay.
instead of stable.
So I go and take a picture one day and then I come back the next and it's moved a foot. And then I have to go and explain to a judge, this has been here for more than 24 hours and they say it's in a different spot now. How do you know they didn't leave? If they left at any point, it's not 24 continuous hours
They could do
anymore.
that in 24 hours as well as they could do it in,
But
month.
then it's automatically not applicable to our ordinance because it says 24 continuous hours. So if they left for 5 minutes or 1 minute, it's no longer a valid legal claim.
There's a bunch of lawsuits
Yeah.
over, it's called chalking, there's a lot of lawsuits over it.
Tom, this is a lot like the taking of the decibel readings. They have to be done for one continuous hour at 10-second intervals. And if it's stopped and interrupted,
You start
it's all
all
over again.
yeah, but nobody looks at it from the sense that it means what it says, that you start here and you end here. Not that you have to have the sound the entire hour or whatever the time period is. What's the time? What's the occurrence within 1 hour?
But it says if it's interrupted, then it starts all over again. This is this is continuous. So that one word right there makes this very
In my
difficult to
neighborhood, we
enforce.
did that every day. That's the only way we can park on the street, is
Yeah.
go out every day and make sure we move the car, because they used to get chalked all the time, so. But anyhow, that's beside the point. I mean, the idea is not to have these semi-trucks in residential neighborhoods. And then, so you got the, on one hand, what's a residential neighborhood? What do we define? Is it 2 acres? Is it 20-acre lots? You know, I mean, there's gotta be some flexibility for larger pieces. I mean, a lot of farming, Wyatt's have gotta have semis for stuff that they do, or at least parts of the year they do for harvesting, so there's farmers that are gonna need semis at some point, but the real concern was trucks in the neighborhood, so.
But what's the problem with it if it's in their driveway? I could see if it's on the road, but if it's in their driveway, it's their property. It's a truck driver, he's on the road for 7 days, he comes home for 2 days, and then he's back on the road for another 7 days.
I had a neighbor in my first house, I had a neighbor who drove truck, and he was the most conscientious neighbor I ever had. I mean, he literally rolled 5 miles an hour down the street around our neighborhood so no one would notice his truck. You know, that's all, not everyone's that way. But sometimes, they let the trucks idle, especially in the winter. They'll let them idle all night long. And to have a diesel truck idling outside your bedroom window 50 feet away is frustrating to a lot of people, so. And then just having a huge truck in someone's little driveway is, it's the same problem we have with big motorhomes and driveways and things like that, so there's conflict issues. It's not, like I said, it's not everyone that causes a problem at all, so.
The neighbors who don't have a problem with the semi sitting on the driveway aren't the ones calling. It's the ones where the smell is irritating to them or the noise is irritating to them, and those are the residents who are calling regularly with this is just outside my house and I don't want to look at it, I don't want to smell it, I don't want to hear it. So, and we do get quite a number of those.
But I think the point is, it's been on the books for 40 years, so the ordinance isn't anything new, it's just how it's enforced, so.
I believe this ordinance was changed though, wasn't it? Like back in, it had to have been sometime previously when I was here, because I remember us working on this. Yeah, so I remember us working on this.
Yeah, but that's why I thought it was, had something to do with the subdivisions before,
Yeah, so
so.
it was subdivisions, and I remember changing it to where it said continuously, because that's where the problem was, because there was a few individuals that would move it around their property. And so we changed the word
Yeah.
continuously, so it wouldn't matter where it was on the property, if you're gonna move it on your property, it's still counting as as part of that 24 hours. There was one in particular individual, I remember, why it was changed. And the truck was always idling too, that was the problem.
I mean, we've got people that build shelters for trucks too, and
Yeah.
they do a really good job. They're
Yeah.
very respectful, but it's like anything else. You gotta enforce for the whole, not just a few, so. What do you suggest right now?
Do you think we should take it back and come back with suggestions?
Yeah, I think that.
This has helped a lot for us to gauge what some of the possible options are, so we can bring it back to one of the next work meetings for.
Okay.
And we can research some of the other communities too and see what they do.
Yeah, this has gotta be a common issue, so. Any other thoughts for staff?
Was, one of the calls I had seemed to be representing somebody, but they indicated that there was a time when you could, during the zoning process, where you could have your property designated agricultural. Is the way it is, you know, it can be, almost anything can change it from agricultural to residential, light industrial, any number of things.
It can be tax classified agricultural, but to go to have it rezoned, it has to go through a rezoning process.
Okay, all right.
All right, and then the final ordinance request is Appendix A, Section 25, fence regulations. With new development in urban residential lots, there have been numerous issues with residents building fences in the easements and within the right-of-way, and taller than allowed with no permits. In an effort to mitigate potential property damage done to fences placed in the right-of-way or in easements during the winter plowing, and in an effort to maintain traffic visibility on street corners, staff is requesting a recommendation for an amendment to the zoning ordinance to require zoning permits for all fences within the R1 and R2 zoning districts for zoning review and permit application, as well as the zoning inspection of the fences.
This is common in a lot of the suburban areas now. This would only be, I mentioned the new developments with the smaller lots, where we require the permits, just to make sure that fencing is placed in the correct area, not on neighboring properties or
I,
easements.
excuse me, I thought we had some kind of permitting process at one time.
We have a certificate of compliance, which is after the fact, but most people are unaware of it and don't seek them out after the fact.
So I remember years ago, we had a discussion of requiring surveying, because that's the biggest problem, is fences not put on a property line, so. So do we require surveying?
They were required in the past, I don't know what they've been doing.
We haven't had any requests about fences other than the variance request that we had in July. Typically, residents just put up fences. I know up in Whispering Aspen, we have an issue where approximately 6 houses continuously have fences going straight into a drainage easement. So if there were ever any drainage issues, Public Works would have to go out and remove all of the fences to get to it. And it's just because the residents were unaware of that. If we had a zoning review before the fences were installed, it would save them a bit of money because they wouldn't be putting fences in the
Oh, yeah, I
easements.
mean, I think it goes both ways with
Yeah.
that, so.
That's for access to a drainage area that you described? Is there a likelihood for something like that to happen?
It hasn't. I'm not sure, but on the off chance, so with the ground, if the ground were to be saturated this spring and something were to happen where Public Works needed to clear a culvert or something like that over in the park, they would need to just go straight through it.
A lot of these ponds are retention ponds, so they're not wet all the time. So sometimes they build these fences in there in the dry season. Then when you get runoff and snow melt and excessive rainfall, and that's where you have the issues. And we're required by state statute to clean and inspect these stormwater impoundment structures, every one of them once every 5 years. So we do 20% of them a year. So that's where we find a lot of these issues.
The drainage, to me, drainage means anything that runs into it.
In any platted subdivision that was done after all these stormwater things are enacted, there's generally some retention ponds in them. That's the issues that we have. And like I say, the retention ponds aren't always full of water.
Right.
They're to hold water, and then they essentially, they lose their water by evaporation, which happens in the drier months of the summer. So there are instances where fences have been built into these ponds, and the one that Aaron just described, where you have 6 of them that came together within a pond, create a real issue.
It exists. Was it an issue?
Say that again?
It exists. Was it an issue? Did something,
Yes, we found out some of these because there was required access to several of these drainage ponds that were inaccessible because fences were built through them.
It's a matter of access, and it also could create some flooding issues on some lots too, depending on how the fences are, where they're positioned in the drainage way. They could cause water to back up on adjoining properties. They could cause excessive siltations in specific places, so anytime they're in one of these drainage easements, there's always going to be a potential issue.
Have you thought about what kind of permit fee would be attached to something like this?
I know some of the cities don't charge anything.
Okay,
Some of them
that's a good
do-
start.
Some of them do $50.
Yeah.
All it is just making sure staff takes a look at it.
We could do this similar to the deck repair permit or the $15 so that it, so that we'd have time, like, cause the permit application fee, it would take maybe 15 minutes to do, driving out there to go check on it, then it's not costing all the taxpayers, just
Okay.
the person who's installing the fence.
So it sounds like it'd be reasonable, so.
I think I heard you say new construction?
Yep, new construction. Yeah, and it's mostly aimed for, the new urban sized lots.
Wait, why would we only do it for new construction?
No, not new construction, because anytime, anyone can have a fence at any time. I just mean more geared towards like the smaller urban lots right now.
But it's in preparation for the,
Would it be any fence?
Yeah.
Like-
Okay,
like-
that's, okay, that's what I was confused
How,
about.
what size is your lot, Randy?
It's about a half acre.
Oh, it's a little bit under that one, like 4.495 or something. Anyway, meaningless.
Excuse me.
Ignore that.
Okay, any other concerns to convey back to staff?
Yes, I have a concern. So, I mean, we're talking any fence, and, you know, I would be careful of the wording here, because I mean, someone who just wants to maybe put up a little fencing around their garden,
That's different.
but that's not different, because it says here all fencing.
Yeah, well, we can take a look at what the other cities are doing.
There's gotta be a definition for
There'll be a
fence.
definition for it.
It's gotta be between 2 property lines. I mean,
Well,
that's the objective.
now
And
that,
to go
that
under drainage.
I could buy,
Yeah.
is if someone is building a fence on a property line, then they would have to get this permit, okay? Because if, you know, I mean, for instance, you know, if I'm just gonna, like I say,
Within a certain
I just
area.
wanna, if I just wanna just block off a certain area within my yard, it's still a fence.
Or a decorative fence, whatever.
Or a decorative
Cedar
fence.
or something, yeah.
My other concern is, I realize it's kind of going down in the weeds, but what about invisible fencing? I mean, that's still fencing. Are we gonna have a permit for that too?
No.
Then I think those things need to be
Cause that doesn't,
defined.
that won't disrupt the city, yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't
No, and I don't think so either. But again, when we're talking about, you know, creating ordinances or changing ordinances in order to address an issue, I think we have to be careful that we don't end up with exactly what we've been talking about now for the past hour, which is going back into ordinances saying, well, we need to redo this ordinance because we didn't create it, you know, with all of the details in mind at the beginning. And so I'm just, you know, saying, hey, look, it seems to me that there are, you know, certain applications of putting up a fence where, boy, do I really have to come up to City Hall and get a, you know,
Well, maybe that's what we added, it's just a statement saying, you know, this ordinance or whatever does not include, you know, invisible pet fencing, decorative fencing, you know, outside of
Yeah.
10 feet of the property line or whatever, you know, something like that. You know, be some things, so it's clear to people, things that aren't covered.
I
So
go
now
for
I
Being
have-
fencing around your patio next to your house, or what, you know, things like that.
perfect, I like it. So my other concern is last winter, we spent an awful lot of time discussing snow fences. I know you remember.
I absolutely do.
So my question is, are we going to be requiring a permit for that as well? Because that is not only going, you know, along maybe somebody's property line, but it's also going into the right of way.
I don't believe so, this is for permanent fencing.
And
We would
if we
be-
have
Yeah.
it between two
Permanent
properties,
fencing with footings and
yeah, but it's not permanent fencing, yeah, that's probably the easiest way to deal with it.
And we could always link back to what our snow fence requirements are in that as well, so that if somebody were to go to the fence ordinance, they can know where they need to go to find what they're looking for.
Sure, I just want to make sure that we're addressing those issues and
Yeah.
saying, you know, okay, what is going to be the requirement for getting the permit and what may be an exception?
Mm-hmm. And that may be one of the exceptions you have in there.
Then I'm okay.
I appreciate the first part completely, though. Somebody after tomorrow is going to be reading and interpreting these, so the more clarification you can have into it, the more definition without being overdone. Or the simpler the language.
All right,
So my question is this for all types of fences? Or, I mean, does a chain link fence impede the,
it does.
Yeah,
the right of way? Does a picket fence, or is it just,
Picket fences do too, because again, they can impede where public works can't get back there to.
you gotta be able to drive a truck through there, so. That's why, I think our bigger problem with these drainages is not fences, it's trees. People plant trees, they're not supposed to plant trees. We have to be able to drive a truck through there, and we've had to cut trees down before in these easements, so.
And there was an issue over the summer, somebody put a fence across a power line easement. So like, we were getting calls from the power company saying, why is there this fence here? What can I do? And like, honestly, it was probably, the person who was calling was relatively new, because most of the time they'll just drive straight through it. So if we do this review, it's saving the resident the time and money that they would have known not to put that fence there,
Mhm.
because they shouldn't have.
I think that's the flip side of this too. I mean, it really helps the public make sure they do it right.
Some
not
of these,
taking down
a number of these newer developments have covenants, talk about fences, one thing or another, allowed, not allowed. Is there any conflict here?
Well, with the zoning review and having it be a permitted process, that is something that I'd be able to look into now, because we would know that a fence was going in. Because the city does do certain enforcement within a time frame per the developer's agreement for some of the subdivisions.
You have covenants, I think, don't you? Not about fences, probably.
Okay, anything else?
I have one thing that's come up recently. It's
Okay.
another ordinance revision, and it involves the regulation of the sale of tobacco. And there's recent federal legislation just recently approved that raises that legal age to 21. Our ordinance specifies that the legal age is 18, and we need to adjust our ordinance to reflect the new legislation.
It's pretty straightforward.
All right.
Yeah. Make the ordinance comply with the law.
Okay. Anything else for us?
Thank
You
for
good? You
your
got your
time.
direction? All right, great. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Stephanie. Item 4.
Item 4 is a discussion of the 205-63 Highway 65 storage unit potential expansion. In 2003, a site plan was approved for the existing self-storage facility at 205th Avenue and Highway 65. At that time, self-storage facilities were permitted use within that zoning district. In your packet is an aerial of the property in the original 2003 site plan. In 2008, the property zoning changed to B2. Central business and self-storage facilities were eliminated as a permitted use within the district. Currently, the existing facility is a legal non-conforming use. The new property owners purchased this property in 2019 with the understanding that they could expand the existing use based on the previously approved site plan. The property owners have recently become aware the expansion of the legal non-conforming use can only be obtained and approved by City Council. City staff is seeking direction to provide the property owners a recommendation as to the expansion of the self-storage units. If City Council gives a positive recommendation to move forward, the property owners will then begin the process for site plan approval, including but not limited to the following: grading and drainage plans, site plan itself, architectural plans, and all other requirements of city code, including fire access. The mayor and Stephanie and I met with these people about 2 weeks ago. They explained their case to us. They were totally unaware of these requirements, and you cannot expand a legal non-conforming use. So we told them we would discuss this at the work meeting to get council's feel on allowing expansion of the storage units at 205th Avenue and Highway 65. These are the ones that are just south of the ice arena. Stephanie's here. She has a little bit of a background on the previous application. She'll be able to answer questions for you if you have any for her.
So, and one other thing to add too is the drawing that's in our packet that shows 7 buildings. That was the proposed plan back in 2003. That can't be constructed according to current code because of the fire lane distances have changed. So, and so we made them aware of that. And did they come up with a new sketch?
Not yet, no.
Okay, so they know that they can't build it as it's drawn there, because I'm not sure what the numbers are, but the lanes between the buildings have to be bigger. And so they won't be able to get all those buildings in there. So really, I just want to say that, so it's not going to be as dense as it's shown here. It'll be somewhat less buildings. I don't know what the layout's going to be, but, so when we met with them, you know, rather, because I said we got this work meeting come up, to just take the temperature of council and if there's interest on expanding it. And there's a few things to discuss with this property too, but, so we just wanted to bring it up to the work meeting to give them an idea whether they want to go forward or not, so.
Yeah.
I think they should be able to, because that's what they purchased the property for. That's the understanding they had. And it's not their fault that things changed.
But,
If I
but it's not our, we made the point to them, and they understood that. It's the realtor that was part of the problem, and it's not uncommon for that to happen, so.
So let me just back up for a minute. My understanding is that this site plan was approved for a different owner. Is that not correct? I mean,
Stephanie, keep
this
going.
new owner has now purchased this since this site plan, so it's not as if, you know, they had the agreement to make this, right? I mean,
Yep, that's correct, yep. So this was the site plan that was approved for the previous owner. This was what they were gonna build. They only ended up building 2 of them.
The first
The-
owner, there's been
The
multiple.
first
owners.
owner,
The
yes.
first owner.
Correct.
With the understanding that it was gonna be phased in as the demand for the storage units were. So it was never expanded to its full site.
So
These
my
are-
feeling is that if, you know, if it was still the original owner, I'm not really opposed to doing something, I'm not. But, you know, to say that they should just be able to go ahead with it, I would be more inclined if it was the original owner who had the agreement on this site plan, rather than it's been sold and repurchased and somebody new is coming in. I mean, just like any other type of agreement, once, you know, that there's a change of sale of property, that kind of null and voids kind of a previous agreement is the way I'm looking at it, unless I'm thinking about this incorrectly.
Yeah, well, even if it's, say that the original owner still owned this, they would not be able to come in with this and do what was approved back in 2003, maybe?
Right.
Yeah, because it doesn't meet code at all.
Well, but again, you know, to allow them to expand at all, I mean, I would be more inclined to say yes if it was the original owner. Now, again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, and I'm not opposed to looking at that and saying, well, I mean, they own this property, why not let them put it to use? Again,
Correct.
conforming to the updated, you know, specifications that are required. I am not opposed to making that happen.
And that's really the question here is the council okay with them expanding their current use on this property?
For me,
you know,
it's
the one thing I'll just say, and we talked, I brought this up when we met with the new owners too, is, I mean, I was on planning when this went through, and there was a lot of discussion over this, because it's right on Highway 65. And kind of the mentality that we had back then was that these are like temporary uses of land, because they're easy buildings, they can be knocked down in a day, and they'll be turned into something else in the future, you know, some commercial use in the future. I mean, we've all seen what the storage industry's done over the last 15 years. It's different, it's totally different now. And these things are in demand, you know, and so this is probably something that will last here. It wasn't an interim use permit or anything like that, it's just, it was permitted use. So, to me, if this was a new proposal right here, I think we'd be having a different discussion, far different discussion. But like you said, it's there, it's been there, it makes sense they would expand, so I'm not opposed to it at all, so.
Same
I just
here.
want to give you some background on how this got approved, so.
For me, somebody has a problem, what can we do to help them? And be reasonable.
And it will come through again as the whole site plan review process, so you'll
Sure.
be able to see it once
But it'll-
again.
But it'll have, just so we all understand, it won't be that,
No.
because it doesn't meet code,
Not even close.
so.
Well, that's what my question, Stephanie. How many more would go in there? Probably 3 or 4 more?
I'm thinking exactly, maybe 3.
3
Maybe
more?
3,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like I
And-
said,
and we
with
talked
the
about-
turnaround and the drainage. and-
Well, we talked about them probably having to have another access too.
Yeah, they'll have to
Oh,
have
coming in
another,
off the north side there somewhere?
Yeah, so the trucks can drive, if
Okay,
a
okay.
fire truck has to go in, they
Sure.
can drive through, so. So consensus, seems like we're all
Yeah.
okay with it. There we go.
thank you.
All right, thanks,
Thank
Seth.
you.
Number 5.
I've given you a handout of the proposed memorandum of understanding. This is number 5.0. It's for the Elevage project. The draft memorandum of understanding for the Elevage project is provided in your packet as attachment 1 and also as a handout in front of your seat. The primary question related to this draft is the specific assignment of a date for the commencement of the utilities installation and road completion. The developer is requesting these dates to complete his negotiations with his commercial lot sales for Phase 1 of the project and to satisfy his commitment to his bank for financing. While the dates commit the city to a timetable, they are conditioned upon approval of all the factors necessary for us to start our portion of the project. The draft MOU in the attachment and as in front of you has been reviewed by the city attorney. The date for the start of the city utilities was added by staff. This draft has been submitted to the developer, and we are awaiting his comments. In my last conversation with him, that was what he said, that he needed to satisfy his financial needs in moving forward with the project. The city's obligations for this project are approximately $4.2 million, with $3.2 million to be funded by MnDOT and $1 million by the city. And this project will not affect the city levy. Council's requested to discuss the Elevage MOU and provide direction as to the details of the document prior to submission to City Council on January 13th, 2020 for consideration of approval should this be something that's going to move forward. There is one change that we'd like to make in addition to what's there, and that's under item 2D, city improvements relating to the berm. We would like to add that that is contingent on sufficient property available to do the road outside the existing easement. And the berm would be constructed from excess waste material from the road excavation.
Okay, first question, we have our packet, and then we have a printout, is this, can you explain this, what,
The printout's what's in your packet.
but this has comments on it.
If you go to your packet, let me make sure.
Oh, I gotta turn it on, I don't have mine turned on. Okay, I see it. It's just not showing. So whose comments are these?
These are the city attorney's comments.
Okay. So my first question, and it's the question I had, and it's a comment that the attorney had, is it says here the city's gonna construct the road regardless whether or not we get the MnDOT funding?
That's what we'd committed to. We'd committed originally to do advanced funding to do that because we didn't know we were gonna get the MnDOT funding at that time.
Okay,
So we have in place the advanced funding request to MnDOT. All we have to do is pass the resolution and submit that to them.
okay, all right. And if that advance of funding doesn't work?
The advanced funding worked for phase one. It wouldn't take it all the way to Viking Boulevard.
I guess my question is there some reason that, to fear the fact that that advance funding won't be approved?
We've been given every indication that we have the green light from MnDOT for the advanced funding approval.
Okay, if MnDOT goes rogue and says, no, you're not getting this money, are we still committed to building this road with city tax levy?
That may be a condition we want to add in there.
Yeah,
Condition
that's
on
where I'm
MnDOT
going with
approving.
this.
Yeah,
I don't like,
okay.
I like the
Yeah.
city's words, we'll construct regardless.
Yeah.
No, we're not gonna construct it regardless, so it's contingent.
Did
Doesn't
you,
say what funding, but it's contingent on MnDOT funding, right?
Yes,
Even advancement is technically
Correct.
MnDOT funding,
Correct.
so, okay. Okay, don't scare me.
the second paragraph requesting dates to complete, et cetera, satisfy his commitment to his banking for finance? How, we're talking about Department of Transportation or whoever helping us out. What's the risk on his financing with his bank?
I can't answer that question.
But
He assures us it's going. If he doesn't get the financing, then all we gotta do is we don't do the project.
Is what?
If he doesn't get his financing, he can't fulfill his part of it, we don't do the project.
Don't have to.
No, don't have to.
We already made a decision we're gonna do it
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, we're gonna do the
Yeah.
road and everything anyway.
But if we
There's-
don't get the funding, we're not doing the road.
Correct.
Okay. Make sure that's clear.
Yeah,
We've been burned once, we're not getting burned again.
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't want my taxes going up 1,000%, so. So, perhaps what they're asking if from a timetable is, let's make it our timetable. When do we expect to have a signed agreement with the grant? Do we have a timetable yet? Wasn't it like July or something?
We're hoping by May when we get plan approval. Craig's supposed to have, once we get the plans done, we send those to MnDOT.
Okay.
Once they approve those plans, then we sign the grant approval.
Okay, so we can give them that window date. If that falls through and we go to Plan B, which is the advanced funding, what's a timetable for advanced funding in June when we find out we don't get the grant?
We can, the process with advanced funding is we would submit a resolution to MnDOT next month, and that could be secured as a contingent, as a Plan B in case the other did not.
Oh, so we're gonna request the advanced funding, and we're only gonna take it if we don't get,
That's correct, and we may need to use a little bit of that advanced funding up front too, to start on the road before the grant is technically available to be drawn down on.
right, we talked about that, okay. I'm
So
just,
those would kind of run parallel.
so we're doing parallel, they're not sequential, okay.
Correct.
So when would we find out about advanced funding?
Next month.
Next month,
Yeah.
so I think just give them that framework, right? Because if we don't get
Yeah.
one or two of those, this isn't going anywhere, so, not even phase one, right? There's no way.
Well, and it says everything is conditioned on us getting their grant approved, getting all the permits done that the city has to have and he has to have. And it's also conditioned on receipt of an awardable bid. I think that's a key consideration. If we, let's say we bid this thing and it comes in at $6 million, well, we're not gonna award a bid for that,
Right.
so. I think we have enough conditions in there to cover us that
Okay,
if they don't come through, then we're not obligated to do anything.
on the second page, on the top, which I think is 2B, it states that we agree to commence the utility work related to the city constructed roads prior to receipt of MnDOT funding. Does that include the advanced funding too?
That's what we need to make clear.
You need to clarify
Yeah,
that
yeah.
then, so. Because we can't start until we have some kind of funding. Roads, we talked about roads during their site plan review. Are those gonna be city roads within their development?
Correct.
And that's what they're going with that?
That's correct.
Does that need to be in an MOU?
That will be in the developer's agreement.
Okay.
My question is on F, where the attorney says city agrees regarding the roads at the city's expense with no assessments against property or portions thereof. There's gonna be no assessments on any of these roads. Is that what that's saying? Or,
That's correct. On the main road, which is the one that parallels Highway 65, the developer will be responsible for all the internal streets, but this isn't planned for any assessments.
And that's kind of where I was,
Yeah.
why I asked the question about who's building the roads. It's, I don't know if it's
Well,
clear that which are the
Yeah.
city constructed roads.
under number 4, Elvidge is constructing the roads on their property, and then they have to turn those, they have to meet the city specs, and then they have to be dedicated as public roadways.
I think how we fix that in F is on the second line after roads, insert, on the granted right-of-way easement. I think that's the idea. They gave us the easement, we build the road, and we're not gonna charge them for the road because they gave them the easement.
That's correct.
Because that way it's clear which road we're talking about, so. Does that help? I think it does.
I think so.
I don't want this to be construed that the roads within their development, even though they're gonna be city roads, they're building it, they're gonna deed it to us, so. I agree with the 2 deletions the attorney had too, and page 3. Makes sense. Any other comments by anyone? Assume we'll see this again.
I will get these changes, get Chris to incorporate those, and we'll have.
Have these gone to Elvidge yet?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll inform them of what we're looking for in terms of changes tomorrow, but I'll get these, and I'd like to have these on the 13th council meeting for additional conversation and consideration of approval.
Any other comments or questions for staff? All right. Moving on, item 6.
Item 6 is a discussion of the city's interest in trying to promote and sponsor or endorse other city events, festivals, and celebrations. Councilperson Suzanne Urkel requested city council discuss the potential of other city events besides Booster Days. Activities endorsed or sponsored by our neighboring cities are listed in your packet. We looked at what the city of Cambridge does, the city of Isani, city of Ham Lake, St. Francis, and Oak Grove. And as you can see, there's a variety of things that they partake in. Isani and Cambridge, of course, are quite different than we are, in that they have a downtown and the ability to sponsor maybe a few more varied events than we do. The discussion points I think that council might want to consider in looking at this, though, are really the types of events that may be of interest to city residents, being able to identify encouraging citizen volunteers and support for these activities, how do we involve civic, school, and church groups and businesses as sponsors, coordination of these activities through a civic group or groups such as the Chamber of Commerce, and defining the city role in financial participation in these events. There's a list of various organizations that could be incorporated in this process, list of the facilities that we have that might be available in some of our challenges. And at this point, I'm open to hearing suggestions from anybody if this is something we want to pursue. And if we do, then we need to find a way to try to identify what can be done and how to achieve it.
And so I wanted to specify something, that I wanted to do stuff that's simple and inexpensive, if not free, using community resources, community volunteers, community donations. And I was thinking, like, the first thing might be like a Easter egg hunt up here at Booster, and if the weather's bad, have it inside, hide some eggs around for little kids. I don't think we need to do anything else for the 4th of July, because July is the Booster Days month, and it's quite busy for those of us on the Booster Days committee. But maybe in August, do the National Night Out, and maybe combine it with our town hall forum. Sorry, it took a second. You know, have it on the Tuesday night, or instead of having a July town hall, have it in August on the National Night Out Day. And that night, we could have, I think we would have more politicians, elected representatives coming. And just, you know, make it a big potluck or something. In October, maybe a trunk or treat. And I think that before Halloween, and I think that's a good time, because election is usually right around the corner. There's usually, unless it's an off year, but that's another good time to get people together. In December, can we do like a tree lighting or something for Christmas? Have a cookie decorating or a gingerbread house making event up here. Just some little things to build community and get people to know each other. I think it would be nice. I'm not getting a very positive feeling from you guys, but
No,
I-
I'm
hearing a
excited
lot of
about
work.
this.
No, I'm just listening. I
I'm
would-
excited about this, these ideas, but I'm thinking start small, and as the community grows and as people come together, they're gonna bring ideas, and, they're gonna wanna get involved too.
The only issue I have is volunteer. It's hard to get people to volunteer.
It
For
is.
anything.
Yeah.
That's a part. I mean, I don't wanna use any city staff. I'd rather see it be volunteer, you know, but
What, just, what's the status of the firefighter dance? Is that's canceled now or not?
no, they're gonna have it,
They
I
are.
don't know for this year.
For this year?
Yeah, for
some-
2020?
Yeah.
No, I think they are gonna have it again, yeah.
They are,
They've already
oh.
reserved the band, yeah.
Okay, I thought I heard something earlier.
Well, they were talking about it, maybe
Okay.
doing something different.
Okay,
Well, I know at the Booster Days firefighter dance, or this is.
well,
I thought they were,
it's a separate thing, but it's the night of the booster days.
yeah, they were saying they wanted to be kind of out of it. So
The booster days?
the firefighter dance, they weren't
Well,
gonna put it on.
They really didn't make up their mind. They can't make up their mind either, so some of the firefighters wanna keep it going, some don't. So
Okay,
that, as of right now, they're still planning on
They're gonna have
2020.
to, yeah, we're gonna have to decide real soon, so.
Right. I mean, they're, you know, ticket sales and things like that, and so it just,
There's a lot of reasons, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I was just trying to get perspective of,
But
'Cause
as
that's-
right now,
that's kind
Steve,
of part of that.
they are gonna have a dance.
yeah, okay, fireworks.
Yes.
We already budgeted
Yeah.
fireworks, you know, so that'll happen, so, okay, I just wanna get that perspective, so.
Let's go back to National Night Out, which you discussed, about having, you know, our public meeting at that time, and I don't think that works. Because the whole point of that particular evening is to spend with your neighbors. And I know that I happen to hold one myself, and I know that's also a good time for the fire department and also city council to go to some of these events and meet the neighbors in their neighborhoods.
okay.
I don't think that it's a bad idea to say, okay, let's have a, you know, a get-together and make it something more than, you know, just, you know, an open house, but I still think it has to be its own separate evening, rather than trying to attach it to that particular event.
Years ago, on National Night Out, there used to be a big event over Booster West. It was, the Lions hosted that. I mean, I know one time there was at least over 100 people there. So, I mean, it's been a big event. And that kind of dwindled, and the membership of the Lions have changed and things like that, so.
Yeah, and then
But that wasn't put on by the city, was it?
No, the city supported it.
You know, we set everything up and cleaned up, then the seniors took it over after the Lions. They had it for a year.
Oh, that's right, the seniors took, that's right, yeah.
And, again, it started dwindling, and people wanted to get more of these block parties. I think that was becoming.
Yeah, back then, we pretty much just had that in a few parties. Now it's, you know, we'll have 15 parties around the city, so. And it's, I don't know, I think it was attended well back then because it was a kind of a central place. And honestly, there were a lot more families and kids back then, just the age kind of thing. But I think you're right, I think the fact that we've gone to these, and it's not National Night Out anymore,
Not to unite,
it kind of changed, I think, when they changed the name.
yeah.
They got to more neighborhood things, so. But I think Ham Lake's got they have, I think their Lions puts on a thing at Ham Lake Park on Night Out, so. But I always enjoyed it, because there's a lot of people there, and, you know, they had games and a lot of kids and food. Fire department was there all the time, so. But like we said, like Tim said, it's hard to get volunteers. I mean, it's hard enough to get volunteers for Booster Day Committee, so. But it takes someone with the drive to push it, you know, and a champion.
Well, and I know since I've been here, I've been discussing this particular topic for a very long time. And like you say, I mean, there's that's not the only problem. The first problem is getting the volunteers. The second problem is that a lot of these actually do take some financial investment of some kind on the part of the city. And again, I wouldn't be opposed to that either if you know, it was something that we could build on. But I think you're right, Suzanne. I think, you know, we almost have to start with something small. I mean, I've talked, you know, for a long time about, you know, having music in the parks as a thought. And I think there's other things that you know, we could do to get people involved in different things. But again, it's, until we can get those volunteers to do something, and I've had this conversation with Jack, and I told him flat out that, you know, we have the senior center right next door. I would be more than willing to, once a month, hold a board game afternoon over here and try to get something going. Now, that, you know, wouldn't really cost us a lot of money. It would just be my time that would be involved. If anybody else would want to join me, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Go for it.
But at least it's something that we can, you know, at least maybe try to get some activities going on.
You get the pulse of the city anyhow, if they want to
Well,
participate.
again, it's, you know, I may be sitting there all by myself. Who knows? But on the other hand, even if you get, you know, 5 or 6 people in the room, and then they have a good experience, maybe the next time we have 10, maybe after that we get more, and maybe we could build on it. And in that case, now we're talking about something where now you're talking maybe 25, 30 people who may come and say, okay, you know, we're going to try something new. So.
And a lot, excuse me, Tom, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, could you give an example of the board games? Like,
Well, there's a wide variety of board games.
Yeah.
There's so many that I can't even count. But I mean, yeah, I mean, there's the simple board games like Parcheesi or even a card game like maybe, you know, cribbage or you know, hearts or something, to the more elaborate games. You know, I mean, I have games that are literally, you know, strategy type games. You know, and there's games where you're you know, playing against your, you know, opponents, and there's other games where you're working together against the scenario of what you're trying to do. So I mean, yeah, I mean, it depends upon what people want to feel like playing and how deep they want to get into a particular game. So I mean, if for instance I said, okay, we're gonna get together on February 14th and you know, have a Valentine's Day event, you know, and we're gonna get together and say, you know, I'm gonna bring these particular games, and these are the ones that we're going to, you know, try to get everybody to play or teach them how to play. If you've never played before, we'll get you going. Or there'll be a lot of other games there to just sit there and, okay, pick one and sit down and have some fun.
you mentioned board games, first thing came to mind was shuffleboard.
That's not
That's
quite
not board
exactly a board game. That's more of a floor game.
We're thinking Monopoly and card games and,
Well, this is.
but I think that's a great
I think
idea.
Jackie touched on it too. I mean, it's, you know, I grew up in Crystal, and as a kid, you know, we had a park and rec department. And they had these kind of things all the time, like Saturdays was especially big for that.
Mhm.
And more in it geared towards kids, but there's a lot of family stuff too. And so, because years ago, we had the discussion at parks, and I think we did the parks plan, so do we need to have a park and recs program? And we talked about and looked at the cost and all that, and we just couldn't justify hiring a staff person to do, someone's got to manage a park and recs program, so. You know, that's how you get a lot of things going. So we had momentum before, but.
Well, a couple of the other things too is, Suzanne, you're a member of the chamber, correct?
The what?
You're a member of the Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, if I could ever get my dates to match up with theirs, I'd be going.
You know, I think one of the things that's key to these events too is getting civic organizations to sponsor
Right.
these. The chamber, I think, is a great vehicle to try to get involved in some of these things. And I think we have to look at starting small, not starting big, and build on each one of those. Some of the churches are good vehicles to use to help develop some of this stuff. The schools, I think Cedar Creek is a valuable thing too. They have lots of programs going on out there.
Yeah,
One of them too, they have this thing where they do the astronomy or the star. They have an astronomer come in a couple times in the summertime, which is a pretty interesting program. But there's a number of things that you can probably do to coordinate this, but trying to get it all organized and coordinated is a big challenge. But to me, I think it's gonna start a lot with the civic groups and the people we have in places that probably have, you know, memberships that they can recruit and attract volunteers much more easily than the city can call out.
yeah, I think we're in a better position to support rather than to, other than your board game idea, to support, you know, some other organizations that wanna do some of these things. You know, another example is Snowball down in Ham Lake. I don't think the city supports that at all.
No, the chamber is.
It's the chamber that
What
does
the
that.
city does, they kinda do like we do, their public works department.
Yeah, plow the
Sets
roads.
things up
think-
and
yep,
cleans
yep.
up, but that's it.
But financially, they don't support it, so. So there's opportunity, and they have a summer celebration too, so I mean, they have two
Yeah,
celebrations.
they have a 4th of July thing, so.
Yeah, but Snowball, I remember, because I was actually on the very first committee, because I was involved in Soderville baseball, and Soderville baseball was involved with that. And I was on the very first committee, and I'll tell you, it took, there's 3 people, Chris Mickman was the big one, the owner of Mickman's, driving it, and a couple other people, one was on Ham Lake Parks, and they were the champions, and they worked hard, they really worked hard, and it's still going on. I mean, they almost dropped a couple years ago too, but, you know, but it takes those champions really to wanna do it, so.
And another place to start this discussion too is with their Parks Commission. You know, I'd like to get them heavily involved in this too, see what some of their recommendations are and make sure that they're aware of what's going on. And like Steve said, and I just briefly mentioned in the write-up, a lot of these things come through Parks and Rec programs. We don't have one, and we probably won't have one for a while, but eventually we will. That doesn't solve any of the issues now, but that's something down the road. But I think we have to look at all stages of this, but that's something that probably should be a Parks Commission discussion item.
Yeah, I think an example, I think for when we started the 5K, Michelle, I mean, it was a citizen, she pushed for it and she kind of ran it. That's how we had a 5K in our booster day. It was just someone who's a champion of a certain thing. So I think that's the catalyst to get things started, you know. So there's ideas out there to come forward, you know. We have a board game, I like that. Maybe not in July, December, but in the winter for sure. That's cool, that's a good idea. It's low investment, brings a lot of people in together in one place.
Hopefully.
so.
So I tell you what, I'll get
Serve a
together
bunch
with,
of popcorn. It's
They
cheap.
got a popcorn maker
Yeah,
over
they
there.
got
Yeah.
popcorn popper and
Yeah.
everything, so.
so do you have any objections with me getting together with Jack and maybe setting some times and getting some dates that we could maybe put on the website?
Knock yourself out.
Yeah,
Well, if you need help, Randy, I'll volunteer my time.
I think it's a good idea.
All right, very
See how
good.
it goes?
Thanks.
You know, as far as the chamber too, they have a meeting this Thursday, but I don't know if you're gonna go to chamber or go to the board first, you know, and see how, you know, kind of feel them out for, you know, helping out on some of this. You know, just, you go before the whole chamber or go to the board
Well, you
first?
can
and
go
then
to
let
the meeting, it's this meeting this week's.
They have one this Thursday.
Yeah, it's right next door,
Yeah, next
too.
door, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's on Thursday,
Yeah.
so that'd be,
11 o'clock, isn't it? For
11:30, yeah. I mean, maybe at the start, we can
Yeah,
bring it
just-
up and.
again, it's finding that right person.
Right.
I think that's a great idea from the chamber's perspective. You'll get a champion there, and I think they'll be good. And they may have other ideas too, so.
And I could go to the PTO at Cedar Creek in East Bethel and see if I mean, those parents are from most of them are gonna be from East Bethel, maybe Oak Grove, but see if any of them would be interested in volunteering and incorporating anything that they do at the school that might not get the word out to like even the homeschoolers or something.
I wonder if there isn't, they got their community ed program. wonder if
Yeah, and
there's-
that's dwindled down quite a bit.
Yeah, see, that's what kind of, the community ed programs kind of make up for not having a park and rec program. And,
Yeah,
but maybe if there's something there that makes sense that,
but
They
they
do.
could publish stuff for us.
well, but I mean, maybe they have an activity that they don't have a place for or whatever, and they can do it here in our community center or somewhere in our city, and certainly we could promote it, so. But you're right, yeah, their community ed's developed, or that's dwindled quite a bit too, so. Good ideas.
How about the shuffleboard, was that a good idea? No.
I don't think we ever had a shuffleboard over there. I don't think we ever did.
If you spread the tables out just a dab, you,
Yeah, but shuffleboard here will only work if they serve alcohol, so
oh. Can we do that?
I'd go play shuffleboard.
I think what you've introduced, Suzanne, is worthwhile, and it's not just a one discussion item, it's something that we
Yeah.
need to continue to look for opportunities to do so. And, I'll be more than willing to keep a lookout for stuff, or anytime you got anything you wanna talk about, come drop by and we'll see what we can do about it.
All right, well, what I would really like is to plan like a Easter egg hunt or something like that. That would be like the very next thing I would like, and then after that, it would be booster days. And then maybe October, a trunk or treat, use the parking lot, people just come up here because, and on Halloween, we get like 3 people coming to our house. I have all this candy left over that I'm trying to get rid of for weeks. Because people don't like to come up our driveway because it's a long driveway and they go to the short driveways. So, I think if people came up here, it would be a lot faster for them, their kids to get through, and it would build us more sense of a community because people would actually sit and talk to each other.
Well,
You
and
talk to the car next to you and
Yep, the trunk and treats are, I mean, that's just relatively new. It's only around for a few years. And it's getting
Right,
better,
but-
yeah. I mean,
but we have the perfect parking lot for it.
So I
but
know,
it needs that sponsor. I mean,
Yeah.
there is one of our saviors this year.
I was just gonna
It had a
say,
sponsor to do that.
Art Savers does it every year.
And
They've been doing it for years.
but what a lot of these, like, I go to a car show every year up in Isani, it's in October. And that's what they do. Everyone's expected to bring a big bag of candy, because everyone brings their kids to the car show, and they go around all the car, it's a great time. But that's a nice idea. You
Yeah.
put everyone in one spot, the trunk and treats, and, it gets a sponsor, especially if there's car clubs. There's a lot of car clubs up here that can get involved, and, the more cars you get, the more kids you get, so. But yeah, it's tough to trick or treat up here, so.
Halloween was called Devil's Night in Detroit. They cut way back, but they used to set the city on fire.
Yeah, I still remember that.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Burn down neighborhoods.
Change the subject now. But I like the trunk and treat, I like that, so we'll think about that one.
It is a good idea.
Okay, anything else on this? We'll just have a continuing discussion and bring Nate into it and see, maybe talk about it parks, so maybe talk about parks next meeting, so.
Wow. That board thing, wonder if, bring that up at seniors. They might be interested in
Oh, they
another
would-
event to
They
get
would love
together.
it, I'm sure.
Tim?
Yeah, do it now in the winter,
Go to the
I think you'll get
seniors.
more participation in the winter.
That was one of my thoughts, yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's something you
not
can,
that
you can
can't-
set up right away.
When-
you
Not
know?
that you can't do it in the summertime,
Right.
it may be something we could do then too, but, yeah, it's,
You have to find out.
in the wintertime, you might actually get some people to come out
I'd
and
probably go there,
try something.
all right?
I've got one quick item just to bring council up to speed on. It's the continuing discussions with the Prairie Pine subdivision. When we last talked about this, we asked Mr. Strandland to get up with Athens Township and have them give us some numbers on what they were willing to do on cost of this project. I met with Athens Township and Mr. Strandland last week, and they submitted some numbers for us as to what each person's share would be for this project. I emailed that to you earlier. You also, there's a handout that lists the breakdown of the cost. I also did a little quick rundown to determine if we did maintenance on half this road, what we would spend over 20 years, and that would be approximately $44,000 or approximately $2,200 a year. With the breakdown that they have given us, they're suggesting that our portion be $56,000 for the paving of that road. This road would be aligned as I took everybody out and showed them back in August as to where the southern half of the travel lane would be, which would be on the county line. The impact of this would be half of what it was on the original proposal in terms of tree removal. So, you know, I personally think them requesting $56,206 for us is something, if we're interested in this, we may want to counter with some lower figure, not to exceed what we would actually spend on maintenance if we did maintenance on this portion of the road over a 20-year period. So I'm just kind of looking for direction as to what council wants to do going forward with this now that we have some numbers on what our potential costs could be and how we want to address that.
Why does this road have to be realigned? Why can't they use the existing road? The existing gravel road?
The
They
location.
My
can,
question.
well, they can, but they want to pave it because the lots will have more value if the road's paved going in there rather than on a gravel road. So that's why the developer says he'll put up 87,000. Now, I'm not lobbying for anybody.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, everybody in that gravel road said they don't want anything to do with blacktop or anything. It's just, why don't you just blacktop his development and?
No, I understand your question, but
Yeah.
I'm just relating what the proposal is, and the developer has said that, you know, he doesn't know if he can sell the lots unless the road's paved, and that's why I'm thinking this is a little bit more than we'd want to put into it.
So how did you, how were the numbers calculated? What's the formula?
The numbers were calculated based on the, hold back up. What happened with that? The numbers, let me get this, find this one thing one more time, see if it'll stay open.
'Cause what I'm, oh, you got it. Okay, so it's basically just splitting the costs.
That's correct. This was just splitting the cost. What the difference was is what Mr. Strano put in, with the exception of Athens would bear twice the cost of the basic Class 5 overlay. And there was another cost in there for signs that would be used for the Athens side of the road, which would reduce our cost by $6,000 over what they were going to be done with an equal cost split.
Well, my heartburn comes from of who benefits from the road.
That's
And
exactly.
to me, it's very clear Athens is the one that's gonna benefit from this thing. I mean, the existing East Bethel residents, there's only 3, 4. It's no big deal there.
Actually, there'll only be 3 in this application because this proposal would stop the road basically at Mr.
Oh, that's right, we're
Strandler's
gonna stop for
entrance.
the end, so.
So the little cul-de-sac down there, the resident, that would not be affected at all with the paving.
So we're putting up 18 grand a home
Yeah,
to get a road paved, that's gonna benefit Athens, not us. So you know, I appreciate the fact that we've got the smallest portion, but
How many houses did they discuss putting in there?
well, they're gonna put in 16, right?
15.
Yeah. So there'll be more, but that's not existing, so that should all be borne, to me, it should all be borne by the developer, not the city, so.
Yeah.
I mean, the only argument is the reduction in maintenance costs. If it's truly reduction in maintenance costs, and then to me, now, I want to say the net maintenance costs, because there's still maintenance costs on the paved roads too, but
But again, keep in mind though, that we do not do maintenance on that road currently. That's what we would pay if we did maintenance on half of it.
right, but if we don't do maintenance on that road because we have the agreement with Athens to do the other one,
That's correct.
which I assume if this gets paved, that's gonna be revisited too. So why would we do maintenance on a full road when we're sharing it with Athens? We're gonna have to figure something else there too, right?
Well, it's quite odd, is the road 245th, all the travel services in East Bethel on that side.
There
We
you go.
share with the 181st,
And on,
No.
on the east side,
North
the
side.
south, 181st, the north side is East Bethel, south is Ham Lake.
No, I'm talking Athens.
Athens.
Yeah, but
That's 8 miles away.
it's not like it doesn't happen. There's
No,
more
I'm
than
not
one
saying
location.
that. I'm saying, my point is, the agreement we have is, we do the east side 245th, Athens does the west side, we pave it, Athens doesn't have to do anything anymore. So we would have to revisit technically, cost sharing for,
well, there's another aspect of this too. Let's say the road was paved and Mr. Strandland put his development in, then who does the snow plowing for the people that live in East Bethel?
yeah,
Personally, my recommendation, we plow our own residents. Because if we don't, Athens may have a different policy for plowing than we do. So who gets the complaints?
oh, I agree there. We have control over that. Yeah.
Uh,
But again, I'm looking at 30 residents along that road, all the way up to 65, and they're the ones that drive to St. Francis that way, and they're gonna benefit from having a paved road, so I don't know how much is other than reducing the maintenance costs. And I'm okay with setting aside the agreement, just
Yeah.
what would it cost to maintain this road over 20 years? That'll be our savings, so.
And that's what that 44,000.
So 44,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what that counts is 2 applications of Class 5 gravel. It'd be like once every 7 years.
Do we ever have to build up that road at all?
That road, to my knowledge, hadn't been.
Doesn't look like it has.
Hardly anything's been done to it. There's one drainage issue that would cost us about cost about $20,000 to do, but if we split it, it'd be 10 would be our responsibility. And then there's the fact that we'd have to run a motor grader up there probably about twice a year to work the road.
So do you need anything from us on this, or you just,
I just need to know how we want to respond to them.
Looks interesting to me.
other thoughts?
So there's a line item here for the swing away on mailbox posts and install for Athens. Now, obviously during this road construction, we're gonna be taking out all of the mailboxes in East Bethel, so who's gonna be responsible for replacing those?
That would be probably us, or we could change it any way we want to. That's yet to be determined.
Okay,
These are just the numbers. I didn't get these numbers until late Friday afternoon. So there'll be 3 mailboxes to replace. That's gonna be
I know, it's a minor piece, I'm just asking the question, because I know that when we were originally discussing that road, we were talking about having, Dirt Works go ahead and take care of those items, and I don't know if that was ever agreed upon or
that was not part of the stuff that was mentioned with them.
with Strandland though, wasn't it?
Yeah, he is Dirt Works. But the mailboxes were never discussed. We didn't get into that level of detail.
There's no cost for moving those power poles.
Again, that would have to be determined since the project's gonna be Athens. They would probably have to take the lead on that. But they have not contacted Connexus yet. but that would be another condition, it'd have to be relocated at no cost.
How does it work if a subdivision's going in, like those houses, as far as bringing utilities, phone service, power, et cetera? Making it available? I know the contractor does a lot of the costs, but
Whatever cost would be there would be borne by the contractor, but most of the time, the utilities, if it's a short enough extension or a dense enough development to justify it, they go ahead and install it, and they get it back to their
Yeah.
billings.
and he puts into his homes that he's developing, but to get to the street that he's developing on, does the power, there's something where the power company is required to do, I don't recall what the definition is. The power company is required to do such, and others where, the other bits where the contractor or the homeowner bears the whole responsibility.
Well, that would be between the homeowner and the developer. The city wouldn't have anything to do with that since there's no city utilities
Right.
involved.
I'm more accepting if that number is more closer towards what we think our true maintenance cost savings are gonna be, so. It's the only way I can,
No.
personally, I can justify it,
No,
so.
I agree, and that's why I got that number, so I'm thinking what, and as I originally stated, that is, I think is much more than we would ever want to invest in that.
In this scenario, who's managing the project? Athens?
Athens engineers managing the
Okay.
project.
So that means that we'd be using their engineering service? There's $10,000 here in engineering fees.
Yeah, that's correct.
I guess I'm with Steve on this one. I think if we could get this down to where, we can, make the reasonable argument that it's the cost of what it would be for maintenance, it makes it a little more palatable.
That's how we justify paving roads, where the dirt and gravel roads are,
Well,
and what the maintenance
and that's
costs.
part of our paving policy, is the
Yeah.
city agreed to fund those normal maintenance costs over a 20-year period. The only difference is, we don't have any petitioners for this project.
So who would have long-term maintenance on this road?
The long-term maintenance would be the city of Athens, it would be in
So seal coating, crack sealing,
Yeah.
they'll do all that?
Yeah.
Okay.
the only maintenance we would have would be on the subdivision street that we would accept that's in the city of East Bethel.
Yeah. Anyone else? Tim, you're shaking your head the whole time, so.
I can't see why they just can't leave the road and let them, I don't know why it's gotta go into East Bethel and, I mean.
It's an opportunity to fix something that'll be harder to fix in the future.
Right, I understand that, but you got people down there too that said they don't want the trees out of their yard, and you're still gonna be taking some
No,
trees out.
that's-
Another
It's not in
scenario,
their yard, right? It's their right, it's the
Well, it'd be the
right
right of way.
Yeah.
here's another scenario that could potentially develop. Mr. Strandland puts a subdivision in on the dirt road, and then all of a sudden we get 10 lots sold the first year, and they petition to have the road paved.
Sure.
And that goes back to what you just stated, Steve. is-
And we said we commit $100,000 or something like that, so.
Yeah, if this is ever gonna be done, this is gonna be the most cost-effective
Yes.
way to do it.
Anyone else?
I agree with Tim.
Yeah, I'd like to see Mr. Strandland do it, like I said, the cost is, Like Steve and Randy said, we can get that cost down.
Well, it's something, I'm still not happy with it, but
Right.
it's something I think is,
Yeah, I mean,
we can
like
justify.
I said, we're not really benefiting, I mean, we're getting 17 houses, but the road, like you said, it's Athens, it's all.
Well, and again, I don't think we can justify it unless we can show that this isn't benefiting the developer. And the only justification of that is what would the maintenance cost of this be over a 20-year time
Yeah.
span?
Yeah, guarantee it, that having the entire road paved is gonna benefit the developer. Cause
Yeah,
if you have a dirt road and it goes to a paved road, there's gonna be people that are not gonna wanna
Yeah.
buy those houses.
Right.
They're just, I don't know what it is, but there will be, you know, so.
Dirty cars.
Yeah, dirty cars and new shocks every 2 years and everything else.
and glare ice on the road through half the
Oh,
winter.
Spring, yeah, springtime. So we good there? We good?
Yeah.
Is that direction or not?
So the direction is that if they're willing to lower our cost to what our estimated maintenance charges are for 20 years, we'd be willing to explore this.
It's a starting
See what happens.
Isn't there a MOU or something where they automatically do that road and we do another end of the road or something like that?
Well,
We-
that's what I was
Isn't
talking
it-
about,
We have a gentleman's agreement.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
Nothing contractual.
And that's the
But we
road
would
that's
still
right
have
off
to
of
do the
65.
housing area,
well,
right?
what Jack's saying is, we would probably still do it anyway, cause it's our residents on the other road.
Yeah.
So the gentleman's agreement would just basically go away then, so. I think there's consensus, so.
All right, I'll,
I think the other thing I think it was brought up too is, and that's why I asked if Athens is gonna manage it. I mean, to me, we should form this as, we will contribute up to this much. And if their bids come back
Yeah.
50 grand higher, you know, the developer in Athens have to figure it out. This is just our contribution to it, so. Cause it's, our contribution, what way we're packaging is independent of what the costs of the road are, whereas this is our cost savings, so. All right. I think we made it, only 14 minutes late, so.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Motion made and second, any discussion? Hearing none, to the motion, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes, our work meeting's adjourned.